We're building distributed cloud infrastructure for the 70% of the world that hasn't been touched. Most of the hard problems, the unsolved problems that we see, again, in the real world, that's where they are. They're at the edge.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year, but so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now, I'm Noah Scheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley.
My guest today is the CEO and co-founder of Armada, Dan Wright. After starting his career in the legal field as a lawyer at Goodwin Procter, Dan joined the company AppDynamics, eventually becoming the COO, and then joining DataRobot, where he became the CEO. In 2022, he co-founded Armada as its CEO. Armada combines connectivity, compute, and AI at the edge to run advanced applications and perform complex calculations on-site instead of the cloud. This reduces the time between data collection and action, delivering faster, real-time insights, especially for applications of AI for industrial legacy industries. Armada's mission is hot. The company just announced another $131 million funding round, bringing their total raised to over $200 million, led by all sorts of who's who of venture capital, Founders Fund, Lux Capital, Shield, and even Microsoft. In this conversation, Dan and I went deep into the why and the how of the business. He opened up the storybook and shared a little bit more with us. I hope you enjoy the conversation. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I am very excited for our guest today. He has been in the news. The company has been in the news. Dan Wright, CEO, co-founder of Armada, fresh off a big funding round, $130 million to keep building the mission. But that's not what we're talking about today, right, Dan? We're here to talk about product, we're here to talk about customer, and we're here to talk about how you did it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No, great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with you, Dan, because I know there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of excitement about where you are today. I want to do a quick trip down memory lane, and I want to just talk about you. You've been at this for a while, but you've not always been a tech founder. And I was really fascinated in looking into your background. Like, you came up as a lawyer. And I think there's a few people who make that transition, but lawyers have this reputation of being risk averse and being rule followers and creatures of structure. And here you are, this is, I think, your second or third tech startup. Talk us through that journey for you. What led you down the legal path, and then what had you leave?
Yeah, great question. I think as far as what led me down the legal path initially, I was always really interested in law more as it related to enabling things like venture financings that allow these startup companies to grow, and acquisitions that allow a combined entity to go faster, and IPOs that allow private companies to access public markets. And so I got into the law because of that. And then I actually went to work at a large law firm. I still have a bunch of friends there. And I got to see just tons and tons of companies go through all sorts of things, from big transactions through amazing accomplishments and tons of challenges. And through that, I was like watching the movie over and over again of these founders that would like take an idea that seemed totally crazy and then make it real, and then actually have a big impact in the world and on their employees' lives in a positive way. And I was like, I've seen this movie enough. I need to be part of the movie. And around that time, one of the founders of a company that I incorporated, AppDynamics, reached out to me and said, hey, or I should say the founder, Jyoti, what are you doing at the law firm? You should come over here and build this with me. And that was enough for me to make the jump. And I also just always loved the idea of startups, the idea that you can take something that's an idea and with a great team and the right backing, make it into something real in the world from nothing. And so I just felt like I had to be a part of it. And then as I did that, kept working my way up, eventually became the CEO of that company, and then have continued to build from there.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. One thing that's clear is you play to win. It's whatever domain you're in, it's all out, and we love to see that. Dan, your own path, you talked about some of those early, or that early transition period. Take us through from there to your time at DataRobot to like, how did the idea for Armada come to you?
Yeah, so this is my third technology company now with Armada, and I feel like the culmination of just a ton of learning and customer conversations over the years. And one of the things that I saw is there's this common thread between all three companies that I built on, which is data, and specifically how is data used to solve big problems. App Dynamics, it was about how to use application performance data to make applications work better so that they actually give the customer a great end experience. At Data Robot, it's okay, I've got all of this data. I want to be able to democratize AI across the enterprise. How do we automate certain tasks that are highly manual today to enable that? And then what the kind of the core insight with Armada is that there's a few things that are changing that make it now possible to leverage huge amounts of data that's trapped at the edge to solve our most important problems. And one of those is the fact that Starlink is bringing connectivity to all these remote, austere locations all over the world. They just launched in late 2020 in beta, and they now are in right around 150 countries all over the world. They're coming out with a new one every few days. And in the next 5 years, they'll have connectivity that's as reliable and as good as fiber everywhere on the planet. So that's one. The second is you've got a huge amount of data being generated at the edge. Gartner says that in 2025, this year, 75% of all data is generated at the edge, and that's only growing. And then the third thing is now, whereas ChatGPT only launched a few years ago, everybody's using AI in one capacity or another. And all of these execs at industrial companies, large energy companies, manufacturing companies, logistics companies, as well as senior people in the DoD, they're saying, how do I take these really powerful AI models to solve real problems on the ground? And so that's why we talk about our AI is like real world AI, because we actually are focused on solving those real world problems at the edge in both the public sector and the private sector.
Yeah.
And yeah, I actually see that is a logical thread through all three companies, is just the idea that you can use data to solve your hardest problems. The first one, App Dynamics, was focused on digital transformation. This is digital transformation for the edge.
Yeah. I think it's certainly the trend is towards everything on the edge, compute on the edge, the data at the edge, decisions at the edge. This has been certainly in the defense and the national security world. This has been buzzy thing for a few years, and I think we're getting closer and closer to it. When maybe before we dive too much further in, let's just start with so you've laid out your thesis. What was the initial product or the initial, because this is a big system of systems that you're building here. You talk about Armada as a full stack or end-to-end solution. What did you start with? What was the first thing that you built?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing that we did is our galleons, our modular mobile data centers. And even the name of the company, Armada, one of the reasons why it's named Armada is because of the galleons, the idea that these modular data centers that can be like ships that travel to the data wherever it is, even in the most hostile remote environments, and then do all the data processing on site, use Starlink or any other connectivity that you have to send the metadata back. And as we continue to evolve the platform, what we've actually built is what we call the hyperscaler for the edge. And when I describe this for people, I give them the mental model of the traditional hyperscalers, Azure with Microsoft, AWS with Amazon, and GCP with Google. And if you think about what are those at their core, they are full stack infrastructure companies that enable different services that people want to use, right? But those services ranging from software applications to the latest, most powerful AI models like ChatGPT, those things have really been only made available to about 30% of the world if you look at a map, because that's where the hyperscale data centers are. So what we're doing is we're building distributed cloud infrastructure for the 70% of the world that hasn't been touched. And we see that as a huge challenge, but also a massive opportunity, because most of the hard problems, the unsolved problems that we see, again, in the real world, on the ground, in both the public sector and the private sector, that's where they are. They're at the edge.
Yeah. Yeah. Are people still using AWS snowballs? Are those gone? I remember people, when we were trying to do something at the edge, it was like, let's ship a snowball to fill in the blank place. But maybe that's outdated now. I'm a few years.
What's really cool actually about the way we've approached it, we can talk as much as you want, but we embrace all of those technologies. So if we have a customer, we have a value that is heal the customer's pain first.
Yeah.
And basically what we say is whatever you want to accomplish at the edge, Armada is your enabler for that. And we don't yet have a partnership with AWS, but as an example, we do have a major partnership with Microsoft, and a lot of customers want to use Azure Stack. So today you can actually take Azure Stack, put it in a Galleon, and then we enable that to work seamlessly along with any other services you want at the edge.
Yeah.
And that's important because a lot of applications, like for example, we have a partnership with Halliburton for production automation. Those have been optimized to run on that hardware. So the nice thing about, again, our approach is we're extending these services that people really like to this geographic area where they've never been possible before.
I love that you got through that entire answer without saying platform agnostic. That was really cool. Because it's the point. But I think and I want to actually emphasize this, Dan, because I think this is a big idea in the sense that in the early products for national security era, call it 2018, 2019, there was a lot of conversation around we have to train the government on how to buy product. Right. It was like, oh, we're only going to get SaaS multiples. We're only if we sell a product. And I think what we've seen in the last few years, and companies like Palantir have obviously been at the vanguard of this, is that you can build massive, hugely successful businesses by leading with services. And by services, we mean solving a problem. And so for you, putting the problem at the core of it versus the product, it's yes, do you exist to sell Armada tech? Absolutely. But the only way you get to sell Armada tech is by solving the customer's problem. And I think that's anytime I meet a founder is, oh, you have this problem. Yeah, our product solves it. It's like what the customer hears, I think more often than not, is you're not hearing me. And so it was cool to hear you lead with that.
Yeah, honestly, nobody in the public sector or the private sector jumps out of bed and I want to buy a new piece of technology. It just never happens, right?
Yeah.
The only thing that people want to buy is a solution to a problem. And so we're in the business of solving problems. Our problems that we're focused on are those big problems at the edge, whether you're talking about processing a massive amount of unstructured data from drones in a remote location for the DoD, or you're talking about just doing 24/7 surveillance of rigs offshore in the North Sea. I told you, I'm about to fly out to Norway. And that's what we're focused on for that. Again, solutions to problems. We're a mission-driven company. We're very focused on that. And I think if you focus on that and then you deliver those solutions and you deliver value to customers, the rest takes care of itself.
I definitely want to get into some of the problems that you're solving and tell some of these stories. Let's go all the way back to the beginning because we've talked about the thesis of the company and how you got after it. Talk us through your very first. So you talked about what you built first was Galleon. What was the very first problem that you set out to solve? And I'm curious, did you go after a commercial problem? Did you go after a government problem? Maybe talk us through that process.
Yeah, so we're a little bit unique because most companies, startup companies, most companies would not take on a problem as big as our mission is to bridge the digital divide and build the hyperscaler for the edge. Most companies, startup companies would not think that big. They would take on one point problem and then they would build from there. We set out to build the hyperscaler for the edge from the beginning of the company, which is a bit unique. The other thing that's unique about us is that we built for both public sector and private sector very intentionally from the beginning. And when I say that we built targeting the public sector, I really mean that. I was chatting with my friend and one of our board members, Trey Stevens from Founders Fund, and he's also one of the co-founders of Anduril early on at the company. And he gave me this piece of advice, which has stuck with me. He said, with public sector, you are either all in or you're all out. And where most companies mess up is that they're somewhere in the middle, and that doesn't work. And so we made the decision early on at the company to be all in on public sector, but also knowing that you have the valley of death and it can take a little while for tech adoption. We also went after the private sector, and that strategy for us has worked really well.
It was a both and. Did he follow that up, by the way, with the immediate hire a lobbyist on day one? Because I think a few folks have gotten that advice from Trey.
Yes, he did actually. He said that was a key learning from earlier in his career is that you don't wait on that stuff because that's part of being all in. You have to be able to play the entire game, and that's part of it.
You got to play the game, play it as it lies, right?
To play it as it lies, right? And yeah, so for us, what we didn't do is try to work with every type of company in the private sector. What we did really see as the biggest need was industrials, particularly energy companies that have large amounts of data trapped at the edge. And I had seen this from customers that I had with my previous two companies and that I had talked to before even incorporating the company, we talked to them and they said they have 5 terabytes of data being generated on these remote oil platforms in the middle of the ocean or rural parts of Canada or Kazakhstan, these different areas. And so we initially were like, okay, if we can actually enable any sort of real-time data processing to create value from that data, that's huge, because what we were hearing was that the latency was 3 weeks to a month to get like some insights shipped back from their core analytics team at their HQ to the rigs. And anytime you're dealing with things that you need real-time awareness of, 3 weeks to a month is not going to do it. The data is sort of useless.
Yeah.
And we actually have this slide that we show customers, which is showing the value of data. And what's really interesting is like data is by far the most valuable at the moment when it's generated.
Yeah.
And then the value of it drops like off a cliff as time goes on. And so by the time you get to 3 weeks or a month, your data is sort of useless. And so we actually focused early on in both the public sector and the private sector on those latency specific use cases. And some examples of that are, I want to do 24/7 monitoring a rig in the middle of the desert or in the middle of the ocean for things like emissions leaks, things like safety, things like just making sure that nobody is creating a risky situation or there's not a fire, things like that.
Right.
Very similar dynamic in mines, by the way. Like the conveyors in the mines oftentimes will catch on fire and then the mine has to shut down. And then ultimately that impacts the top and bottom line really significantly.
Yeah.
So our initial focus was like, let's just make sure that all of these remote assets, they run the way that they're supposed to run all the time. And then in the public sector, we focused on, again, latency specific use cases. Okay, if I have drones in the middle of the Arctic or the Pacific Theater, how do I actually process all that data immediately for next generation command and control in these remote austere environments versus having to send all that data back to the cloud, which 1 is really expensive, 2 has a massive latency problem, and 3 is not very secure. And that's another example. And then even with state and local customers, like we're working with the state of Alaska, and we started working with them where they were just trying to get connectivity throughout the state. And so we started partnering with them with our Atlas product with Starlink. And then they said, hey, can you also help us manage all of our drones and Skydio drones? They have a partnership with Skydio. Can you help us with our SD-WAN devices? And we did all of that. And then they came to us and said, that's great, but I still have over a day of latency to process all of this unstructured data being generated by the drones. And I'm trying to use that data to better respond to avalanches, which it turns out don't wait a day. They happen immediately. And so we enabled them through our Galleon product to do that.
Yeah. These are, first of all, super tangible examples, which I really appreciate. On one side, mine safety or some of the commercial cases you laid out, these are things that they're not new. Like safety in these environments is not something that did not become a need yesterday. Whereas some of the drone data stuff, that's a more recent thing. It hasn't been around at this point. Drone's been at least a decade, but it's a little bit newer. But when you approach a customer like that, or in some of those early conversations, were those sales, was it like on the spot, yes, this is such a clear 10x, 100x improvement? Or how did you earn the trust being a new solution to some of these very old industries?
Yeah, great question. I think you said a key word there, which is trust. For us, we never had a problem with customers where they said, oh, I don't understand what you're doing or what the need. Like that never happens. Everybody understands that there's this big need at the edge. They know that they have big problems that need solutions, the earlier part of our conversation, and that nobody solved them yet. But then the question is, are you the right person to solve them? And that comes down to trust. And so we intentionally built our platform in a way that is very flexible between cloud and edge, where we can solve different types of problems, whether it's just, hey, I need help with my connectivity, or I need a unified picture for connectivity and IoT management, or I've got this one application from Halliburton that I want to run at this one rig. And then we expand from there. So we built it in a way we can quickly solve a customer's problem, build that trust, prove ourselves. And then there's lots of different ways that we can help them once we get started. And I think that's why we've been able to grow really fast. Just to give you a quick snapshot, we only started selling in February of last year. We're now over 100 paid customers, some of the largest organizations in the world in both the public sector and the private sector. And we've got 10,000 connected assets in our platform. We're operating in over 70 countries. So you don't grow that fast unless you have really earned the right to have the customer's trust. And if you're solving important problems for them so that they then say, okay, what else can this partner do for me?
Yeah, thanks for making that so real for us. Let's dig even deeper. What can you tell us about the team that delivers? Like, how does your organization deliver that kind of growth? What is the relationship between product and engineering and sales? I'm curious, when you take us through, I don't know if there's a customer or a campaign that you want to maybe unpack with us that you guys recently won. What did the team that went forward look like to go accomplish the goal?
Yeah, great question. So one thing I really love about Armada is truly to its core, it's a mission-driven company. We have employees all over the world from all sorts of backgrounds. And what we tell people is if you want to work at Armada, you really have to only have three things. Super easy, right? You have to be top 1% in the world at what you do. You have to be all in on the mission. And then you got to be willing to work extremely hard because that's what it takes to make startups successful. And what we've been able to do by hiring for that from the first days across all functions of the company is we built this mission-driven team where I am very confident when I say you give our team any problem and the biggest problems at the edge, and you give us a time period to solve it, we will solve it. We will over deliver. And some examples of this, there was a moment, and I live in California, I live in the Bay Area, born and raised here. And among our state's problems, we have fires, right? And the fires keep getting worse.
It's horrible.
And there was obviously the tragedy that happened with the fires in Southern California last year. There was a moment when we started to talk about this internally, and with some of our partners, we partner with SpaceX, with Starlink, and we said, okay, there are people that are in need of our technology today. How do we reach them and how do we help? And so we just literally started like shipping product to help customers. And then we're like, we'll figure out payment later. Like, honestly. So we just dropped everything across the company, whether it was a fire department needed a new feature, or it was just, they need some Starlink terminals immediately and we have a stockpile, or it was, they actually need, like in some cases, we actually had people, because we have employees in Southern California, get in a car and be there on the ground to help with the response.
Yeah.
And that's one example. Another example is I mentioned the partnership with Skydio. Adam, who's great, the CEO there, he reached out to us in the fall of last year and he said, hey, there's a problem with hurricanes in the Carolinas and we're working with some of the first responders. Can you help? Same thing. We immediately just went after it. Within hours, we were on the ground helping with that. Even recently, we had a really amazing opportunity to do a demonstration for Senator Slotkin and Secretary of the Army, Secretary Driscoll in Michigan. We had very short notice, like days of notice, a couple weeks. And we partnered with Skydio on that to rapidly enable a demonstration of our technology, which included having one of our galleons on the ground there in Michigan to process data at the edge and showcase the capability of next generation command and control. And
What was that demo all about? Can you tell us more about it?
yeah, what I can tell you is, and this is something I'm really excited to see, I think that there is an awareness that problems that we need solved from a defense standpoint, and that innovative technology companies can help provide solutions. Like that seems like a simple thing to say, but I think there is an all-time high of awareness across the DoD of that, which is exciting to me because you have a lot of people, and a lot of them work with me at Armada, that want to help. Like those are the types of problems that we want to help. And if you ask me what keeps me up at night, what keeps me up at night is we have a very limited window to make sure that we are prepared for a potential conflict with China. Also, one of the things that we really focus on is making sure that we beat China when it comes to making sure that the world runs on our stack as opposed to their AI stack.
Yeah.
So those things keep me up at night. And the cool thing to see now is that we're getting invitations like that where we can showcase what we can do. And there's a real interest in working with companies like Armada to solve big problems for the country.
Absolutely. So I won't push too much further, but is there anything about the exercise itself that you can share, like about what the problem was that you were asked to solve in Michigan?
Yeah, I think some of this is public, right? One of the Secretary's big focus areas is next generation command and control, right? And that comes down to, can you actually take your data that is being generated largely by drones, right? But increasingly also by autonomous technologies in very remote, disconnected environments and use it to provide a better tactical response at the edge.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's all about. And also to coordinate a response across those types of assets that you may be using, drones, autonomous technologies. And so that is what we demonstrated. We demonstrated that Armada, from a defense standpoint, the way that you should think about it is it's like a distributed brain that is highly resilient. Every one of our galleons is like a node that is rapidly deployable, even can be put in the back of a C-130 or taken by helicopter to a remote location. They come in different sizes, so more compute, but you sacrifice some mobility. In other cases, you can have maximum mobility, but you get less compute.
Yeah.
So each one, regardless of which product you're talking about, is like a node in this distributed, resilient brain. And what's really cool about that is that enables, again, real-time use of that data on the ground with no latency, and also completely secure data processing in a way that is very hard to detect. And if something ever happens with any individual node, you can configure the system so it just backs up to another node. And again, when you think about our readiness and you think about the ability to enable things like next generation command and control, I truly think that Armada has a really important role to play. And those are the types of problems that I'm like, let me at it. And that's our whole team. We're like, let's go. And so when we got the invitation to present, it was all hands on deck. And I think it went well.
It's very cool. This problem of next gen command and control, I feel like next gen has been coming for some time now. This has been going on for a few years. It seems, though, that the military is finally starting to make some buy decisions around systems that they're actually pulling forward. Even on the drone side, the drone industry has been tough in the last decade and a half. It seems now the urgency of this, largely driven by what's happening in Ukraine and with Russia, but other places as well. The urgency is being pulled forward. And so what I'm excited by, and I'd be curious if you're seeing this too, is we're starting to see trickles of almost competition-based acquisition, which is, if we're going to do these demos, if we're going to do these exercises, let's use the information of what comes out of those things to actually make some decisions, as opposed to just acquisition by proposal, which is the modality we've been in for really since the end of World War II. Dan, where are you guys on that trajectory in the federal market? Do you have, obviously you're doing some proof of concepts, you're doing some demos, you're doing some exercises. Are you a funded requirement for the military at this point, or are you somewhere in between?
Yeah, what I can tell you is that we're actively working with the DoD. We're actively working as public with U.S. Navy. And what we're continuing to do, take in their requirements and rapidly build what they need us to build to maximize the utility of the technology to solve important problems at the edge. And that, to kind of piggyback on something you just said, one thing that is very exciting is not just like this renewed interest and focus on working with innovative technology companies to build these capabilities, but it's also this focus on, okay, let's give an opportunity to these companies, and then they're going to rapidly iterate on the technology. And this is, again, something that Secretary Driscoll talks quite a bit about, is this idea that you field new technologies, you try them in the field, you find out what works, what doesn't work, and then you rapidly iterate, which is very different from how I think the DoD has approached things in the past, where it is very difficult to get new technologies even in the field. But I think what Ukraine has taught us is that is how wars are going to be fought and won. Like we can't wait years to get the latest technology in the hands of the warfighter. And this is an example of a time where we really don't have that luxury, right? We need to move extremely fast. Not only is there the situation in Russia and Ukraine, but there's an escalating situation with China. They're extremely focused. They're moving very fast. We need to move faster.
I might frame it as overmatch, this concept of are we technologically superior to our adversaries? On day one, maybe I'm going to regret saying this, it almost doesn't matter where you are on day one. What matters is, do you have the ability to sustain that advantage as the adversary comes in contact with your capability and then quickly adapts? And that is truly, I think, maybe not the only, but it's got to be number one. When people get on these panels and these stages and they start talking about the lessons of Ukraine or this technology or that technology, really the only lesson of Ukraine that I care about is the human technology, which is they've empowered these organizations and given them the ability to modify whatever they need, to produce what they need on forward, to iterate faster than anybody, to not worry about these requirements, to be focused on objectives. And that actually should be a little bit disturbing for us, because in that conflict, we are not set up like Ukraine. We are much more set up like Russia. And when you're talking about these exercises and I think the urgency around it, it's really heartening for someone like me to hear. It should be heartening as an American citizen to hear. And yeah, it should be heartening as an American taxpayer for you to hear, because this is about not flushing money behind capability that's going to be obsolete on day two.
Exactly. Yeah. And that last point too about being responsible with taxpayer money, like I think it bodes well for that, right? Because one thing that startups are very good at is taking a relatively small amount of capital, building a technology, figuring out what works, what doesn't, and then iterating really fast to get to a solution to a big problem.
Yeah.
And so I think we're seeing that play out now in the public sector in a way that is very healthy and leverages what we do well as a country, right? That is one of our strengths. We have this amazing technology ecosystem with all these great venture capital firms that are willing to fund ideas or seeds of ideas with talented teams to solve problems. And now that's actually playing out in the public sector in a way that it certainly wasn't 10 years ago. And so that bodes well for the country. We got to keep that up.
Man, if you told any American that the future of the world would be dependent on a competition between America's entrepreneurial prowess or that of our adversaries, who wouldn't take that gamble? That's if we can't win that fight, what are we doing here? Europeans go on vacation in August, man. We're here. We're sorry. We love you, Europe. This is our fight.
I'll take our odds there any day of the week. Totally agree.
I know you're heading to Norway soon, so please, we'll try to not air this until you're back, Dan, so that nobody in Norway gets upset with me. You mentioned I want to tell one other story here. You mentioned the work you're doing with the Navy's 4th Fleet and some of the problems you're solving there. Take us through there, because maybe that's another basket of challenges. We're talking about maritime situations. What problem did they bring to you, and how have you all gotten after that?
Yeah, it's honestly a very similar type of use case to what we were showcasing in Camp Grayling. But what I think is notable about it is it's not one problem that we're showcasing that we can help solve there. It's many problems. And then I gave a couple of analogies. I talked about us being the hyperscaler for the edge, and you could think about the traditional hyperscalers. One of the things that we're doing with the Navy is extending capabilities that people use in these more connected environments to more disconnected environments. And then on the other hand, you have next generation AI capabilities where you're taking unstructured data from all the things that we talked about, drones, counter UAS, autonomous technologies, processing those locally at the edge for tactical response, right? At the edge without the need to send all that data back to the cloud.
Yeah.
And you just can send the metadata back to the cloud.
Yeah.
And so what is exciting to me about the work that we're doing with the Navy and more broadly, conversations that we're having with the DoD in general, people are thinking bigger than they were in the past. I think in the past, people were thinking about this in terms of capabilities that could be leveraged in one specific location or for one problem. That's not what we're working on. What we're working on is a capability that could be rolled out across the world and leveraged to solve lots of different problems. And some of those problems will be things that Armada is solving full stack. Just again, the cloud providers have their own AI applications, but a lot of them will be ones that we're solving with this ecosystem of partners that we're helping to enable. And again, our role is to be this distributed brain for all these remote locations. But what's really exciting is while that capability is made available in one location, each one acts like a node across all of your locations. And then our software enables you to manage it all centrally from a single place.
Is there still mesh networking in there? Do we still talk about that, or people not use that term anymore?
Yeah, no, people are still
We're
talking
still
about
doing
that.
mesh networking?
Absolutely.
All right. All
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah. And that's actually another cool thing about the way we built our system is we, in most cases, have multiple types of networking that we're enabling. It's not the case, again, in most of the conversations that we have, where people are looking at just one type of connectivity, for example. They're looking at optimizing among multiple types of connectivity, having a highly redundant infrastructure, and then the ability to optimize as between performance and cost and security, depending on what use case you're talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, people are still talking about that, but I think they're thinking about it in a way that is very logical, which is, and how do I take all of these capabilities and leverage them in the best way to solve specific problems? And different problems call for, again, different solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of different solutions, one of the things that you all announced along with your funding round is a new product, right? Leviathan, a new scale, size, powered solution. So tell us a little bit about not just what it is, Dan, but why that was the thing to bring to release on the roadmap now, and then maybe situate that in the broader vision of what you all have planned in the year ahead.
Yeah, one of our big focus areas really throughout the life of the company has been this idea of, as Starlink continues to roll out, and I mentioned that it wasn't around prior to November 2020, but now it's in around 150 countries all over the world, and it will cover the whole world over the next 5 years. How can Armada complete the rest of the compute stack and be a first mover so that when we wake up in that world 5 years from now, the world is running on the American AI stack instead of the Chinese AI stack, which would have all sorts of issues, including obviously issues with GDP. You got issues with national security. And so we are very focused on American AI dominance, which is very closely related to American energy dominance. And so along with our $131 million funding round that we just announced, we announced our white paper that we recently published, which is entitled American AI Dominance. And it's all about how we can leverage 6 gigawatts of stranded energy today to power AI data centers in these different locations around the country. And then also how we can use our technology to deploy rapidly our infrastructure and export the American AI stack to allied nations across the world so that, again, the world runs on the American AI stack.
Right.
And we've actually been talking about this for a while, but I was at the Winning the AI Race Summit that All In and Hill and Valley put on, and it felt like a very opportune time to publicly talk about all this. So we did it. And I'd say that the response that we've gotten has been amazing, where people get it, right? You have all this stranded energy around the country in allied territories. Energy is the biggest enabler or the biggest blocker, depending on how you look at it, of AI. And so why wouldn't you take modular data centers and co-locate them to where not just the data, but the energy lives?
Yeah.
And so that's what we're doing. And Leviathan is our latest product in the Galleon product line. Every one of our Galleons has a different name. We have one called Triton, which is 5 racks of compute. We have another one called Cruiser, which is the one that the Navy's using, that is 3 racks can go in the back of a C-130, for example. We even have something that's as small as a suitcase, which we call Beacon. So we have these different nodes to this distributed private cloud, and they enable different things. What Leviathan does is it gives you a megawatt of compute that can be dropped anywhere and used for both training and inference at the edge, leveraging whatever energy is available, from stranded natural gas to the latest micronuclear reactors. Whatever you want to use, we can use that, power these AI data centers, and unleash just a huge amount of capacity for AI. And then the other thing that will allow us to do is have a really rapid R&D loop where we'll continue to iterate on every layer of that stack, and then we'll export it rapidly to allied nations. so that, again, in 5 years, when we all wake up, we'll be in a world where the world is running on the American AI stack. And we estimate that if we do, that will unlock 31 trillion of additional GDP by 2030 and have massive advantages from a national security standpoint as well. So that is a huge focus for our company.
Yeah, thanks for that laydown. And where you ended is actually exactly where I wanted to go next, which is we're hearing a lot about the American AI stack. Obviously featured in the AI action plan. The summit that you referenced, Silicon Valley, was very focused on American AI dominance. When you think about the American AI stack, like obviously the endpoint to customers, oh, am I using ChatGPT or am I using DeepSeek R1? Okay, that's one, it's the tip of the iceberg. What are the other parts of that AI stack that you think are that are contestable or that are winnable today?
Yeah, what's interesting is up until fairly recently, people thought that we were dominant in certain layers of that stack and that we didn't really need to worry about China that much. And that, I don't think people think that.
Are
At
we
least
dominant in any layer of that stack?
people that are paying attention now. And an example is Huawei has been in the news where effectively company backed by the Chinese state, and they are exporting their technology full stack to places like Malaysia.
Yeah.
And that is going to continue. And what they're going to try to do is compete primarily based on price, right? Because they can do this stuff more cheaply than we can, whether you're talking about certain models that they're building or chips or anything, right? That is their advantage. And they're going to try to beat us on price. Where we need to win is we need to have the best technology, and it can't be just like a little bit better. It needs to be a lot better. And then secondly, we need to be a first mover, because the thing about infrastructure is that it is very sticky. Once you're there, you're likely to be there for decades. And if, the sort of disadvantage to somebody who comes later is extreme. It's really hard to get people to move from one platform to another. And for us, we look at every layer of the stack, whether you're talking about the chips, and we partner with all the chip companies to the best model companies in the country. And we partner with every one of them. And then we present it to the customer as a complete full stack, American AI stack. And what is unique about us is that we can have that full American AI stack deployed within weeks, versus with the traditional data center, it's going to take you years, and there's construction and permits. And then sometimes you find out that you built the wrong thing and you got to do a complete refresh. Ours are rapidly deployable, faster, cheaper, and much more flexibly than traditional data centers. And when we look at China, we should all expect that they are going to continue to be really aggressive. China understands that if you win in AI, you win, and that's kind of it. And so we need to have that same sense of urgency. And this is all going to play out in the next 5 years. I really believe that.
Yeah, I think it is just, we are barraged, if you're paying attention, by headlines on a day in, day out basis that we as a country may not be fully aware of what like all out competition really means, right? Whether it's that recent investigation, Chinese students being used as spies in American universities, how China has weaponized principles of capitalism against America's control of supply chains in developing countries, bankrupting firms by just undercutting them with price and then buying them up and shutting America and Western companies out of some of these markets. This is, I think you're absolutely right. This is a bare knuckled, all out brawl. And I still lose sleep. I'm not sure we're getting closer, but I still don't know that we fully as a country recognize that, which leads me, I know, Dan, our time is drawn short here, but you laid out that stack. Let's do this. Folks who are watching, who have watched to the end, we're going to give them a little Easter egg here. Dan, where in that stack do you think, if you didn't have Armada, if you weren't leading this company today, where would you be looking in terms of opportunities to start companies? What are the spaces that you think are most interesting, most exciting, and maybe least serviced today?
Yeah, I think companies that are focused on power are very interesting. So that is one. I think all these new companies focused on, whether it's companies like Exawatt that have like next generation solar batteries, or Oklo and companies like that that are focused on micronuclear reactors. I think that is very interesting, because ultimately you're going to need new energy sources to be China too. Like there's that graph that recently went viral that shows, Chinese energy production versus American energy production. We should all be flipping out about that too and realize that we're going to need to not only unleash all of the energy that we have available today, we're going to need to create more energy and more energy very fast and in a way that can be rapidly utilized. So I think that's one. Another area that I think is super interesting and frankly, we're trying to enable. So I know I'm trying to put myself in the position of Armada doesn't exist, but let's say it does exist, but for some reason I'm not part of it.
Okay.
What I would say in that world is these applications that are focused on, especially industrial use cases and defense use cases in a world where you have ubiquitous connectivity and infrastructure. That is really interesting because I'll just give you an example. Like I've been spending more time over the last few years than in any other point in my life on oil rigs and other types of industrial assets. And what you learn if you go out there is that there is just a huge amount of highly manual workflows, and that a lot of times there's a single point of failure. Like you have a specific person at a mining site or on an oil rig or at a factory that understands how to do a specific task. And if that person decides to retire tomorrow, you're just like out of luck, right? And what is interesting now is enabling those people with modern AI capabilities, AI agents, that they can then help to improve. And as you do that, you're codifying all of the stuff that's in their head in a way that will continue to serve the company well for decades. And I truly believe that's a massive area. And what you'll see from Armada in the coming years is that we are going to have more and more developers building those types of solutions on our platform, just like you have the Azure marketplace or the AWS marketplace. We have the Armada marketplace. And the world that I see, again, 5 years from now is that you've got just a huge amount of AI agents, different types of applications for these previously highly manual workflows that have now been automated to the point that you get a lot more productivity out of the people on those sites. And frankly, they don't have to do the really routine work that they don't want to do. And ultimately, it boosts GDP and makes us more competitive versus the Chinas of the world.
Amen, man. I love that it's a very optimistic, future-focused vision. And I think it's exactly what we're seeing right now, which is that AI is making the best people 10 or 100x better. It's not just about taking jobs. It's about making every single person a superhuman at what they do. So I love that. Dan, before we let you go here, I know we're just about at the end of time. Give us 30 seconds. What are you most excited about right now with respect to Armada?
Man, I'm most excited about just the huge problems that we can solve at the edge. We spent the first few years of the company in the trenches with our customers to really understand those problems deeply. And then we built the solutions to solve them. And now we're at the point now where we're solving them. And so like that to me is what it's all about. At the end of the day, just like I said, nobody wakes up in the morning and wants to buy technology for technology's sake. I think for people building these companies, what fires us up is building technology that solves really important problems. And that's what we're focused on.
Listen, man, I love the boldness of the vision, and yet the clear path to achieve it is exciting. Not only to me, nobody cares about me. It's exciting some people, some big names, some big people with a lot of money and some incredible talent that's joining you on the mission. Plug it for us, Dan. If folks want to test their grit and think that they're in the top 1% of talent and they care about the mission, where should they go to learn more about joining?
Man, just send a note to me, dw@armada.ai. We'll get you going with some interviews and see if you make the cut. But man, we need great people. We're hiring across all functions. If you think you're top 1% and you're all in on the mission, come join us. Come join the Armada.
There it is. Dan, thanks for making the time. Good luck out there. Love what you're doing. We'll be rooting for you and look forward to having you back on here soon.
Thanks, Noah. Looking forward to it.